I mean, for me, I like to say ancestors, you know, first, last, and always. That's kind of how we do it. What? Sure. That's how we do things in our house, because we just sort of, you know. I mean, that's the blood that's in our bones. That's the spirit that moves us forth with a soul's purpose to call us from past into the future through the bounty that is the present. And I think that it's just everything, you know what I mean? It's just everything. If you've been through it, chances are they've been through it. I mean, you know, as we talk about things today, we'll see how some new concepts and things open up. But I think that, you know, they basically understand so many of the issues that we're dealing with, you know, on our survival mode. And they have the most vested interest out of anyone in ensuring that you can move forward and be successful, because they want you to be successful. So that's what we do. For those of you who don't know, I have a New Orleans style voodoo house in Brooklyn that we've been running for about, a really long time now. I don't count that many years, but probably about 13 or 14 years. I have about 20 to 25 active God kids, depending on what month, what day, or what life is throwing at them. So they study with me. In my tradition, it's kind of like a parent-child relationship. So it has to be somebody that you trust implicitly. It's usually somebody who also has some connection to just who you are and being as a person. And I think when we come together to honor our ancestors, it's really special for us. We do. In New Orleans Voodoo, we honor lots of different ancestor spirits. We honor the Gede, which are the nameless spirits. We were talking before about how somebody thought this said humoring the ancestors, which I think is hilarious, because for us the Gede are all about sex and death and laughter and how these things are intricately connected. So some of the more, you know, heady, serious, spiritual type stuff gets thrown out the window when you talk about the Gede. The most important ceremony, I think, that people do for the Gede, especially this time of year, is called the Fête Gede, and this is a ritual that's similar. I mean, anybody who knows anything about European fêtes, it sort of comes from that kind of tradition of having a big party, a big celebration, where anything and everything goes. I remember we have a deity that's sort of the queen of all the ancestors, and her name is Mama Brigitte, and I'm so happy to see her going on here today. I'll talk a lot about her because my house is dedicated to Mama Brigitte. And people ask me why. You know, we didn't have a name for the house for the longest time, and then, you know, all the God kids just decided we're going to call it Mama Brigitte, because I think that so much of what we do is also the mission of Mama Brigitte. It's also having to do with the ancestors and wisdom and justice, and really a kind of justice for response to social injustices. You know, people who didn't have normal recourse to laws and things like that, people that were marginalized in society. And so much of my house is people of color or LGBTQIA people that I think that we really understand today what it's like to come to a place where we don't have the same system of justice as a lot of people that are out there. So, and then I got a lot of, you know, I got kids that are BTW and things like that. So we always had Brigitte kind of influence anyway. So when you go back with the history of Mama Brigitte, she's definitely a Haitian deity, I'll say that. I'm sure if anybody is familiar with some of the controversy that surrounds her online, some people, I won't name who, but some people say that she's really not a deity. But in our tradition, you know, we have deified ancestors, and traditions evolve and traditions change. There's a strong, what do I want to say, basis for tradition and respect and honoring and doing things in the old ways. But if we see something new, we can incorporate that too. So there was a large influx of Irish immigrants during, you know, the potato famine and things like that, that sort of manifested out. And a lot of Irish people found themselves in New Orleans in particular, and seeing some of the things that were going on there. You know, this was the times, a lot of people are familiar with Marie Laveau. She's probably the most popular Voodoo priestess. She's not the only one, but you know, in the 1800s, she was sort of the queen of New Orleans voodoo. And the thing that I love about, Marie Laveau as an honored ancestor, she was the first person to charge for her services, so we all got to eat. I saw something on Twitter the other day. Here's me cooking my breakfast with all the, promotional stuff I was paid for. We all got to eat. We all got to, and that's a way of respect. That's a way of honoring, this kind of thing, especially for somebody who was marginalized in the society, as we're talking about a free woman of color in the 1800s, So she was the first person to do that. She was the first person to hold public ritual in the United States. And she would allow everybody into her rituals, which I think is a beautiful thing. So, people would come. But one of the things that I think people forget about her, because of these ridiculous media, conceptions of her, is that she really knew how to take care of business, I guess, for lack of a better word. If there was somebody who she thought was a janky rival, she would go to their house and punch them in the face and steal their statues and take them home with her. It's like, you ain't doing that here. She was. And then there's all this stuff about how she was also a hairdresser and would get gossip from everybody and things like that. And some of the more affluent women who might have been wives of judges or police officers, and she would use that too to sort of, have her influence. Well, if you're going to say this or not rule in my favor in court, then what's going to happen is I'm going to tell all your secrets and spill the tea, and then you'll be sorry. So she really knew how to use everything, and I think that's something that in our spirituality we forget. I remember one night I was sitting with a friend of mine who's he's got his PhD in sociology, and his concentration was always, possession in the spiritual community. And some of you probably know him, his name's Marty Lubbock. And we're sitting there one night, and we're trying to, okay, let's manifest the fire. And he's like, let's get a lighter. We don't necessarily have to make things more difficult for ourselves. Sometimes it might just be easier, to go to somebody's house and yell in their face and take their stuff. I'm not advocating, active, whatever, but we have a lot of, especially today, I think we have a lot of people who are trying to be nice, and what happens is it just ends up with these decades-long vendettas and problems and people having hate for each other and stuff like that. So I think if we just sort of had it out. And it's funny, even today you see a lot of people that just sort of disappear in the voodoo community, and I think that, it happens, stuff happens. But anyway, so Marie Laveau was there, and there were a lot of Irish immigrants, and they were bringing their worship of Brige, St. Bridget, in that kind of way. A lot of people see Mamba Brigid and Brige and St. Bridget as this form of, triple Brige kind of goddess thing that's manifested in the world today. But there are some differences, especially in New Orleans. She ends up with way more of a practical justice kind of concentration, and it just sort of hearkening back to this history of foremothers, all these women that birthed us into what we are today, than the Brige traditional kind of thing about healing and sacred flame. It's funny because in New Orleans we don't really do fires for her at all. We have them, it's sort of a cold night. And somebody said to me the other day, are ancestors cold? I mean, they can manifest however you want, but a lot of times they do manifest as cold. Even you see it on those Discovery Channel shows or what, I feel a spirit, it's cold in here, So I think that happens a lot. That's a way that they do come, because you got to think about it. A lot of them are in the ground, they're in the earth, they're coming up through our feet. So the earth for a lot of time out there is cold. It's always cooler than the world that we walk in. So the world of the invisibles can be cold sometimes, so we do things in darkness. Very often we build cairns for her, like they do in Celtic countries. And Uchu's coming later. My dear friend and spiritual brother from the New Orleans Voodoo Spiritual Temple. And he does a cross in the cairn ritual for the ancestors, where people light candles on cairns. We've done that, lots of times. When I went to Ireland, I did that there for my ancestors in the cemetery near the, to tell you my Stone of Lou story. So I go, you're supposed to hug the Stone of Lou, and it's supposed to sing if you're the King of Ireland. So I have a lot of young people friends, I mean really young people, like 3, 4, 5, and I came back from Ireland, and I was like, and I hugged the stone, and it didn't sing, and I'm not the King of Ireland. And one of the little boys, Liam, that I know, said to me, well, Lilith, that's because you're the King of Witches. And I was like, oh, okay, that's even better. I like that. I like that. So yeah, we do that. We do some, sacred candles and stuff like that. In my house, we build ancestor jars for Mama Brigitte, which I think is a beautiful thing that anybody can do. What we do is we take a jar, it could be a mason jar, it could be I kind of like using the large size baby food jars or something approximately, just because for practical purposes, it's easier to maintain that and have it on the altar. I mean, our altars are gigantic, but when you get a lot of different little jars on it, like I said, I have 20 god kids and each of them makes one, and we leave that on our ancestor or altar, shrine, or in Lakumi tradition that would be called a boveda. We leave it there, and that's like there's a piece of their ancestors, their heritage there, so I can access that energy even when they're not there. It's similar to in Haiti, what they would do is they call it a gobi jar. So you're putting the soul of somebody in a jar. Not in a bad way. I'm thinking about Pinterest. I'm like, Pinterest has all these weirdo jar spells, like take this and this and this. And, no, it's in a positive way. What you do is you get the dirt from the cemetery, from all the graves that are from your family. It doesn't have to be a lot. Leave an offering, take a pinch, and then put in other things too that you think that they would like. If my grandmother was really fond of lilacs, so, lots of times I will dry out lilacs, or if I see a lilac, or put lilac oil or something like that in there. I like to use lavender a lot too, because lavender in Brazil specifically, they use lavender the same way you would use a quartz crystal. So you can use it for absolutely anything and everything. Lavender has a very fluid character, so it can take on whatever it is you're using it for. So I like it in that way that, well, first of all, it's purple. That's, whatever, ancestry kind of thing. Mama Brigitte's colors are purple and black usually, and and then whatever else you think they might like. If there's something that's traditionally that you use for the dead, you could put those herbs or things like that in there. And then what you do is infuse it with your breath, because that's coming from deep inside you, and it has all the ashe or sacred energy of your ancestors coming forth through your body. And what my priest, Lou Martinet, he's one of the co-authors of the New Orleans Voodoo Tarot, and which was the first African-American based tarot in the U.S. There's a lot more now, but it was the first one. He's also a priest of the Voodoo Spiritual Temple in New Orleans. He's also the founder of the Black Moon Archives, which I think at one point was the largest occult archives in the United States. They still run it now, but it's, they're trying to digitize it. Let me just leave it at that. They also have a publishing company. But anyway, Lewis likes to say that you always have your breath with you. So it's, oh my gosh, I might need a candle, or do I need this to do magic? Do I need this to do magic? Yes, taking the time and effort to get the things that will produce results is great. But if you're stuck in the middle of the street and you need to pray to your ancestors, you always have your breath there with you. And you can use that as an offering to send up to them. So I like that idea, so we'll do that. And then Mama Brigitte, traditionally, she's so silent because I think in a way she represents all these old foremothers, and we get this a lot in different African traditional religions, that the older the spirit, the more silent they are. So because she's always silent, what they do is they put cotton balls down for her. Usually in Haiti, if somebody gets possessed by her, what they'll do is put cotton balls in their mouth, which to me always reminds me of The Godfather or something, But I think in a way it's showing you that sometimes these messages from the dead are muffled, and especially because she's an ancient spirit, she's almost primeval in the sense that she predates even modern language. So in those ways, you honor her because she's not necessarily speaking with the same tongue and the same words that you have, so it does come up muffled and mumbled. So we put cotton in there as well. And like I said, anything else you want to do. We like to decorate them with either pictures of our ancestors or pictures of skeletons or different ritual symbols or something for the dead. And I think that way, then you have it right there in a jar. Yes, it's nice if you can go to the cemetery. Of course, go to the cemetery as often as you can. But if you can't and you need to have them, then you know that that jar is there. Or if you need to have somebody have that connection to the ancestors when you're not there. Maybe you're on the road, maybe you're traveling, maybe you're doing stuff. That way you have your ancestor energy right there in that jar, and you can just bring it with you. So That's really helpful. Let's see what else I want to talk about Mama Brigitte. Hot peppers. She's all about hot peppers. Don't go on the internet, this is my warning, and try and look up information, because there's one person out there that was telling people to put hot peppers on your chocha from Mama Brigitte. Don't put hot peppers on your chocha. No. That will hurt. That will hurt. Yeah, ouch, ouch. Sometimes in possession, in very serious possession, obviously there's stages of possession, but sometimes in possession people will eat hot peppers for Mama Brigitte and things like that. In Haiti they make a ritual drink that's similar to, in La Regla La Kumi or Santo, what we would call, or Palo, what we would call chamba. Does anybody know what chamba is?
No.
Oh, all right. Chamba is a ritual drink that they do for the dead that is several different kinds of hot peppers, usually steeped in rum or some other kind of alcohol, and then gunpowder is in it. So when people get possessed, they will drink chamba. Don't try and drink chamba yourself. You know, this is something that, again, is a ritual thing that we make, but it's a crazy thing, and they make something very, very similar in Haiti. Now, you think, why would somebody drink something insane like that when they were possessed? Part of the thing, I think, with possession is that the deities come through, or the lower Orisha come through, and they do things in extremes, because this is sort of a test. So if somebody's sitting here and I remember one time we were doing an Ancestor thing, and it was so, again, which is not here, we were up in Canada, and when Priestess Miriam was there, and we did a giant veve, or ritual ground drawing and cornmeal for Mama Brigitte and the Baron, who's her husband, and it felt like icy hands pulling us down into the fire. It was cold that night in Canada. So we had a small fire, and it really felt like it was pulling us down into the fire. And then about maybe an hour or so into the ceremony, Priestess Miriam rolled into the fire and rolled out again on the other side and was perfectly fine. Now, they do these extreme things because it's like, well, obviously that's not just Priestess Miriam standing there, because if it was Priestess Miriam just standing there, she would have burned if she was in the fire, or she would have burned if she ate apples, or she would have, oh, there they go. Because it has to be these things that are extreme. It can't just be, you know, and this is one of the things I find that's really sad about a lot of people that have, I'm all for incorporating transpossession into ritual and things like that, but you still need to have those tests, because otherwise you're not really sure that's what's happening is really spirit coming through. How do you know? Because I remember once I was at something and the girl started speaking Hawaiian. Well, she spoke Hawaiian. So like this doesn't, this is not a surprise. I want to see something extreme. I want to see something over the top. That way it'll prove to everybody there that the spirit's really there, and that's why these extreme tests are in place, and this is why we move forward, and you really know that message is coming from spirit. So, okay, so there's other things that we do for Mama Brigitte. She likes unfiltered cigarettes. I remember the first thing I ever did, there's a temple in Philly, run by Gromambo, Angela, Nuvavu, Iazo, and there's more words, but that's a Mama Brigitte house as well. And she had done it, I think it was at University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. So we're in like this auditorium, and there's all these all my smokers will appreciate this, there's all these little tiny bowls of cigarettes on the table. So I was like, what's this? They're like, oh, those are the cigarettes for Mama Brigitte. So everybody got possessed, and the spirit came in, and everybody started smoking these cigarettes in the middle of the university. It was fantastic, because I'm a smoker. I thought it was wonderful. So, and the Gede, like I said, they're very lusty, they're very lewd. If you're in a traditional Haitian ceremony, they will say stuff to you, and I have a dear friend of mine who is named Rivaneri Prisiel. If anybody wants to hear any, you know, Haitian music for the Gede, she just published this song the other day called Zozo, which I think is hilarious. I posted it for my godkids, and I was like, oh, here we go, it's the season. And I know they have no idea what a Zozo is. Does anybody speak Creole? Zozo is the Creole word for penis. So, and I can't remember the exact proverb, but it's something like Zozo Coco no Parai, which is a hard penis has no ears. So if they run around and say all this stuff about, you know, penises and what do we call it? It's kaiwa in New Orleans. That's the New Orleans Creole. Like, one is the front and one is the special other word for coming in the back. So there's all these crazy lusty things that they'll say about, you know, she likes it in the front, she likes it in the back, she likes it like that. All these things that come through that they'll tell you about your sex life or, you know, other weird stuff about you. There's another thing, they're very hungry. It's a very hungry dead kind of tradition. So they will pick your pockets. You're supposed to put your jewelry away. If you're going to be going to any ceremony, they'll take stuff from you. Oh, I like that. Let me take that. Which interests me from an anthropological perspective, because if we look at other cultures, there's definitely things in place in a lot of indigenous systems where people are allowed to take stuff again from people in a sort of redistribution of wealth. They would tell us this if we were in Anthro 101 class, that there's got to be a system for equalization between people. And if you have something and somebody else wants it, there has to be a way to make everybody more equal, because that way the society is going to survive and thrive better, because there won't be this disparity of wealth and things like that. I did have a professor, since we're talking about ancestors, I did have a professor who worked in Chiapas and did his field work there, and since it's Day of the Dead, he said during the Day of the Dead, all the people would open up their doors and you were allowed to go into your neighbor's house and take whatever you wanted. But then your neighbor could come in your house and take whatever they wanted. I said this to my godkids, they got so scared. They was like, I would move out, I would go away. But just like the ancestors teach us, we got to not hold on to things. Life isn't about things. Life isn't about possessions. It's about connections to people as opposed to things. And again, I think this is another thing that having this kind of system in place in the religion really allows people to grasp the concept of it. You can let anything go. It has to be there. Nothing has to be present, because even life is a tenuous thing that we're attached to by a very thin thread, and they remind us of this through all the things and actions that they do. So Mama Brigitte, like I mentioned, her husband is Baron, traditionally Baron Samedi. There are as many different Gede as you can imagine, there's really only one Mama Brigitte, but there's a lot of different barons. In my experience, that's what I'm saying. There's Baron Samedi, which is Saturday. There's Baron Lacroix, which is the Baron of the Crossroads. Usually when you go into the cemetery, before you get there, before you even enter the gate, the crossroads before the cemetery, you would leave an offering for the Baron. The most television, again, has conflated these images of the Baron. I have a picture of the Baron on here. The handout that I gave you, the Baron is usually the one with the top hat and the skeleton face and things like that. That's not Papalepa. Again, if you go on to Pinterest, people will tell you that this is Papalepa, and that has to do with modern media representations, unfortunately, of these things. Don't get me wrong, I like media representations, I like people knowing about things, but people tend to take that as fact. And if they don't have the right kind of representation, then it's not fact. What they're going to do is give you something that's really messed up, and that's what's happening. My favorite, media baron was from James Bond, Live and Let Die, which Jeffrey Holder was the baron there, and most of us that are of a certain age.
I was going to say, did they even know what we're talking about?
Yeah, well, he was in the 7-Up commercial, because we're of a certain age, and he would go, But, yes. Yeah. And after he passed, I found out that he actually worked with my uncle. My uncle directed him in a show in Harlem, and he was actually a Trinidadian priest. So that, I think, he brought his authenticity to the situation there. And he was also really fond of doing sacred dances and things like that, which I think he also brought. He did choreography for go back and look, find James Bond, Live and Let Die. It's definitely worth it. Jane Seymour's Solitaire, the, dressed all in white priestess who does weirdo readings with cards and stuff. And it's definitely entertaining. So yeah, but more modern things have not been as accurate, unfortunately. I have studied some of the Gede dances are really amazing. Again, they're very lustful and lewd, and they sort of, mimic this kind of things that the Gedes do in their dance. There's a lot of gyrating hip movements. There's a lot of movements with the cane and things like that. There's a lot of kind of things where you're sort of simultaneously coming out of yourself into this world of the ancestors that is lustier. My godson John, he made me sign that part in my book. There's a Gede Nibo that, and I apologize if I offend anyone, there's a Gede Nibo that has a cinnamon anus that's kind of extra spicy, which I think is very entertaining. He's like, oh yeah, sign the book about the cinnamon anus. There's one that shows up and just farts all the time. There's ones that are insect Gede, which I think is very interesting because a lot of times, you know, we've got this connection between insects and the dead. And my priest who I mentioned before, Louis Martinet, we did a possession session once. And we did it kind of the way they do more nowadays, which is like we invited in a certain number of spirits and we were going to allow them to experience our world during that time. So some of us got chosen to be Gede insects, and it was really interesting. It was really interesting to have that kind of bug consciousness. You know, there's ones that are fleas, there's ones that are lice, every different bug you can possibly imagine. And what he did is have us all come and sort of work through this bug existence, and it was really intense. It was really, really intense for everybody who did it. And I mean, I don't recommend it necessarily being a bug, but I think it allows us, again, to have a different sort of attitude towards those that are past, a different attitude towards things that are responsible for dealing with decay, because the bugs are such a kind of necessary part of the cycle when we're talking about, you know, decay in any sense of the word. So we have to salute them and realize that they have a place in our ecosystem. As much as I hate bugs, let me tell you, I really don't like bugs. But we do have a way of, you know, again, a place for them, a place for everything and everything in its place. So that was it. And Louis is, you know, we get a lot of bugs in New Orleans too. You know, Louis lived down there for a very long time. He just moved back up here to this part of the world. So we'll see how that goes, but it's very interesting. So again, the Gede are sort of the under ones. Hey! I was talking about that bug possession thing we did with Louis. Remember that?
Yeah.
That was intense. It was crazy intense. So, yeah. So, where was I? Okay, so the barons, so there's lots of different barons too. They sort of stand outside of things. They're sort of outside the circle, you know. So it's in a lot of traditions, the ancestors will be first. So for us, they're present there, but we usually do them again first. So they don't get left out, they don't feel left out, and things like that. So I've given you the handout for the honoring the ancestors. This is a good, really beginning way to do. I mean, the way I do things with my God kids when we start out talking about the ancestors, it's more about establishing a connection, especially if you're not used to having a regular practice with them or doing something on a daily basis or a weekly basis. You know, you have ancestors every day, not just on Samhain or these parts of the days of the year. They're there all the time, you know. So I think this is a good way of connecting. I do, again, recommend going to the cemetery as often as you can because they're there, you know, they're totally there. And cleaning it, I think, is one of the most humble, respectful things you can do. I had a client once, not so long ago, tell me she went and she took a trip down south to her ancestral gravesite, and it was one of these ones that was really small and located near her, you know, where her family's homestead was back in the day. And it was all overgrown and everything like that, and she cleaned it up and everything. And then her cousins came in and burnt it down the next day because they were devout Christians. So I was like, that's not good. So yeah. But it really is about the dirt too. That's why I was saying there's so many things that you can do with graveyard dirt. It's not even funny. Is anybody familiar with the work of Jodorowsky? I'm sure you are. I love Jodorowsky. He is, I mean, there's pictures of Jodorowsky with John Lennon and things like that. Jodorowsky's totally old school. I think he's got to be almost 80 now. But he developed something called psychomagic, which is his own system of psychotherapy and magic mixed together. He's also a filmmaker. He probably made one of the most famous pagan films ever called Holy Mountain, which is a journey through the tarot. But I saw him maybe about, I think, 3 years ago, and he was doing his own sort of tarot info session where people could ask him questions and things like that. And he was showing his new movie, and somebody stood up and they're like, how do I connect with my ancestors? And he goes, where are your ancestors from? And she was like, some, you know, Caribbean country. He was like, well, get a giant box of dirt from your ancestors and bury yourself in it. Everybody went, yay! And I was like, oh, this is beautiful. I love this. It was fantastic. He's nuts. He's out there. But he has this kind of, in the same gay day way, he has this way of being extreme and shocking people and things like that. He once told somebody they were having trouble dealing with their biracialness. So he told them, well, paint yourself white and walk down the Champs-Élysées. And then the next day, paint yourself black and walk down the Champs-Élysées. And then you will find the connection that you feel. So he's all about the performative. And I think, in a way, again, when we talk about the gay day, there's so much about that is about the performative. There's so much about that is about, putting your Zozo out there, putting your Kaiwa out there, putting your whole self out there in this bare, naked, lusty way that allows us to connect with this gay day energy that's out there. And when, the gay day, like I said, they're unnamed, so we usually just call them in a general way. I like to call them specifically, in an honoring way, because there's so many of them that have come before us. We were talking about on the way over, where'd Phoenix go? He's like, he wants to do my Indian Red song for the Honored Gay Day, which now Mandy has stolen as well. Mandy's doing it all over the place. I'm like, okay, fine. You can do my Honored Gay Day song. But it starts out, I do it to the tune of Indian Red, which is a New Orleans voodoo traditional song. Originally, I have heard, again, like everything in New Orleans is all about, well, somebody said this. I have heard that it was originally popularized in the 1920s for somebody who was wrongfully imprisoned and killed in the prison, which I find particularly poignant, especially after what's happening today. For those of you who don't know, my dear friend Kay Maselli, who I did ritual with on several occasions, and she was a member of Sally Ann Glassman's house down in New Orleans. A lot of people know it because they kind of did something very similar in the HBO show Treme, but Kane went to the hospital having an asthma attack, and she said, don't give her steroids. And they gave her steroids, and she got angry, as happens when people get given steroids. And then they called the police on her, and they brought her to Orleans Parish Prison. And 3 different police officers sat on her chest while she was having an asthma attack. And she died, and I miss her very much, very, very much. Her birthday is coming up in a few days, but again, there's a lot of people that have been wronged through serious injustices having to do with the police, and not just in New Orleans, but unfortunately all over the world. And when I sing Indian Red, I honor all of those people and also her in my memory. And it begins with a Creole word, which I didn't know because, again, secrets in New Orleans, they go together like, dirty and rice. And it starts out Maripada Cudafayo, which roughly translates to into the wilderness, which I think is beautiful because when we talk about moving forward into the land of the ancestors, the realm of the ancestors, it really is something that is wild and something that is undiscovered to such an extent. When we even think about how many people we have walking around on the earth today, there's so many that walked before us, and just the depth and the breadth and the intensity of that really is wild, for lack of a better word. So I think that's beautiful. So yeah, so I start with that usually. When I'm doing a thing, I think that honoring them through song and dance is something that's very important. Like I mentioned, it's something that happens a lot. I study with one of the biggest dancers ever, not just a voodoo dancer, but she was also a Mambo priestess, was named Catherine Dunham, and I study with one of her students and teachers, Julio Jean, and we do a lot of gay day work together. I'm sad because I'm missing it. His gay day thing is today, so at least know right now that somewhere there's a bunch of Haitians dancing. And they put themselves in the gay day kind of makeup, which is something that you do also for Fête Gay Day. Usually you dress, with white face or some sort of other kind of, bones or some kind of ancestry type thing. And then you would do all those kinds of dances and stuff like that. All right, any questions? I know I'm all over the place. Any questions? All right, I want to talk about one thing that we do in La Regla La Kumi when somebody who was passed because it's, again, there's so much in the ATRs that are very difficult to do if you don't have a teacher, and there's a lot, I mean, there's good reason, because they're intense. So we have a teacher so we know we can be guided. But one of the things that you can do is to do an assistencia for someone. So an assistencia for someone is literally translates to assistance when somebody has passed. And it's a 9-day ritual, and what you do is you start out with their picture on the floor, which is interesting because in most ATRs a lot of stuff doesn't go on the floor, so you'll see why. And then you leave them a glass of water and a white candle, and then and say a prayer for them, and then each day of the 9 days you move them slightly higher up until it gets up to the level of your ancestor shrine or table or boveda or whatever it is you're calling it, and then they can go onto the ancestor shrine. So you're literally like giving them assistance and elevating them into the realm of the ancestors, but it helps them through the transition of being someone who's recently dead, which anybody who's had contact with somebody who's recently dead, sometimes they don't even know they're dead, sometimes they need a little bit of help, sometimes they need a little bit of guidance, so this helps to lift them up and put them into the place where they need to be when they're moving forward. So what else can you do? Phoenix has so graciously cooked all this food. I got in at almost midnight last night after my lovely adventures, and there was all this food cooking and still cooking. And one of the things I think that's really great to do for the ancestors is to cook for them. I mean, remember what they used to eat and go through the things that they used to do when you're cooking for them. I think that's very beautiful. A lot of people do a dumb supper for the ancestors this time of year, which I think is another lovely thing to do for them. One of the things that I do like to say when you're talking about cooking for them, I try really hard not to salt the stuff until after it's been placed on the altar, so their portion doesn't get salted. And it's hard to cook without salting things, but salt, as anybody is probably useful in a magical context, is something that really, salt does not go with any kinds of spirits, so usually we leave that separate, and the salt is for us because that's very grounding, and you know, we're not trying to ground the ancestors in these moments, we're trying to sort of connect with them and have them lifted up out of the earth and into our realm so we can interact with them. So we don't salt it, but again, that's just my own thing. Drinks, cigars, cigarettes, all kinds of things that they would have loved can also go on the ancestor table. All right, what do you do if there's somebody who you don't like who's an ancestor? I think this is, you know, a hard part for a lot of us who had problematic people in our past, in our history. To some extent, I was just at the witch's ball with Lady Rhea, and she's like, oh, if they're all their ancestors, they're dead now, it's good. I think that's okay, but only to a point, you know what I mean? Like, I've got some serious bad mofos that I don't want showing up if I'm having a party. I wouldn't have invited them if they were still alive. You know what I mean? Oh yeah, Uncle Bucko just got out of prison, he's not coming over, you know? So, you know, as you know, you're not going to invite him over, so you're not going to invite him over in that context either, really, you know what I mean? I have a friend who's a Babalao. He's like, well, if you say anything, say useful ancestors, because again, you know, they're not always useful. Some people aren't useful people, some people aren't useful ancestors, you know? So I think that there's a lot of things you can do in that instance if you found that you've attracted their attention or you feel their energies around and things like that, you know. Noise is one of the biggest things. I think that that's something that people aren't used to, but, you know, slamming doors, closing windows really hard, yelling, screaming, clapping, stomping your feet, all of those things helps to get rid of kind of, you know, ancestors that you don't really want to have around in that instance. And then there's other things, you know, I'm not going to give you any of that because y'all are smart people, you know that, but there's things that would use traditionally for protection, things like sandalwood or copal or myrrh or frankincense or all of those things that you can use to set up that kind of magical space to make sure everything that's entering is really something that's welcome and wanted. And then, you know, again, it's my friend Babalao, who's also from down south, so I have to say this ahead of time. Don't start none, won't be none. You know, don't start calling these people in if you don't want them there. Don't start thinking about them, you know. My little 4-year-old friend told me the other day, just don't think about it. Think about something else. Think about some dreams, you know. So, the wisdom of the youth. Yes, yes, but no, you don't have to start, I think it's easy at this time because the veil is so thin that it's easy to start thinking about these people that have passed, in all contexts. But, shift your mind, do what you need to do in order to, and again, using incense and other kinds of elemental protection things is helpful with shifting your mind to that positive place. I mentioned salt before. If you think that's happening, you consult somebody, and just leave it alone. Leave it alone is my best advice about that. So let's see, what else? What else? Come on!
Can I ask a question?
Sure, please do.
What if you do not invite an ancestor? Do they know that there's a party going on and
Yeah.
they're not invited? And are you to expect some kind of retribution from them because you didn't invite them?
No, I don't think retribution
Do you understand
comes
what
into
I'm
it.
saying?
Yes, I do.
Are
what
you
you're
going to
saying.
make them angry, and are they going to be spiteful towards you because you had a party and you didn't invite them?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. That has not been my experience. I think that, again, if they've crossed over to the other side, so my experience has been that they have a different understanding of things in that way, and it's not like, oh, I didn't invite old Uncle Lacko, so he's going to show up like at a, Romani wedding.
Because I had some relatives like that.
No, I think
Yeah, but those are the living.
a different.
And living is much harder to deal with than the dead.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think it does definitely take a different character, and especially again, if you're protecting your space, then you'll be protected. It's sort of like, you're warding off, you're putting on that spiritual band-aid ahead of time. If you've done your protections and setting up your space properly, then anything that comes in and out is going to be something that's welcome. We used to do things, a friend of mine does geodesic domes made out of PVC pipe, and we did this, we did a voodoo suspension. So somebody was like a Sundance on hooks. So somebody was like on hooks hanging from the dome when we were doing the ritual. And because it was a dome, people could come in and out from all sides. So the challenge there was to really set the space where somebody was going to be vulnerable and something was going to be really, really intense without it being unwanted people, living or dead, coming in and out. But, we managed to do it and we managed to pull it off, and it was really great. And all of that. So I think that, no matter what you're doing, even if you don't have walls, even if you don't have windows to close, even if you don't have a space that's actually has the traditional trappings, you can still set the energy of the space so that it has, everything that's supposed to be going on. I was talking earlier to Phoenix about, I had done a workshop with John Mason, who started the Yehuda Theological Seminary in New York. He's like OG Babalawo for, I think, crowned for like 40 years or something now. And he said, voodoo is like a fractal. You can make it as small or as large as you need it to be, and that's why it's been successful, because we can reduce it or expand it for whatever the situation is. And I think that magic in general can also be like a fractal, and you can make it as small or as large as you need to be. So if your energy is okay, and the energy of your space is okay, I don't think you'll have any problems. I haven't, and like I said, I have some bad mofos that would be, whatever, showing up and thinking that this was where they were supposed to be allowed to party, And intent is a lot of it. Intent is definitely a lot of it, I think. That's why I said, be careful of where your thoughts are. In a lot of traditions, even with they'll have, like with the food, they'll only have people who have a clear mind and a positive attitude cooking the food. And some Lakumi houses, they have parrots that will do the calls, because a parrot can deliver the call without thinking about, oh my gosh, I hate my boss, or this is happening with my relationship, or whatever. So it comes out with that purity of thought. So it's like, which I always thought that was, all I could think of is this is such a gay day, I used to work somewhere where they had this garage, had parrots on the corner, and you would walk by and the parrot would go, puta, puta, like they had taught the parrots to say puta, like, I was like, them damn dirty parrots. So, but I think that, it really does, and it's about controlling your own mind and your own intent, and that's, I think for me, when encountering any kind of ancestor or ghosty spirit or spirit of what is past, keep yourself as together as possible. The same way as if, friends with Dorothy Morris, and she has this story once where some intruder came into her house, and Dorothy's part Scottish like me and others of us here. Did you ever hear the story? So she attacked this motherfucker with a pillow, shrieking, naked. You know, if something comes in, whether it's alive or dead, you know, get yourself together, deal with it, and move forward, you know? Just this image of Dorothy, like, attacking him, shrieking, like, well, she's related to William Wallace. So just, you know, like, shrieking like Wallace and attacking him with a pillow. So yeah, that's been my experience anyway, and like I said, and my god kids too, they've got a lot of people that have been not so nice in the history of things, you know, so, but that's just, yeah, it's all about, you know, having those boundaries and setting them the way you would for you too, you know what I mean? This is why I think we have teachers and students that are like parents and children in the religion, because, you know, one kid over here is going to be allergic to peanuts and it's going to send them to the emergency room. Another kid over here is going to live on I lived on peanut butter sandwiches for like 5 years when I was a kid, you know, like, so it's going to be different for each person, and you know, your teachers can help you find out what's right for you, and you can help them find out what's right for you, you know, what happens if I light this thing and put it on the altar, what happens if I light this thing, you know, just observing. I'm Aries with an air rising and an air moon, so I'm not really good about keeping records, but those friends of mine that are earth signs are very good about keeping records, and I think that's very useful for magic too, you know what I mean, because then you know that, oh, okay, well, it was this day and it was a full moon and I was honoring the ancestors and I put out some lavender and then this happened, or I put out this and then this happened. So you know what's going to be much more effective for you just through trial and error. I also like to use a pendulum. I talk about in some of the posts that I've done on my blog about how, you know, you can use that energy of the ancestors to do a reading with, not just yeah, in general you could call in the energies of your ancestors, but sometimes I will call in a specific ancestor. If I had an ancestor that I knew was a lawyer and I'm doing a justice matter, I'll be like, can you please come and help me with this reading, and use the pendulum and see what the herbs or oils or incense or other kinds of magics that I need to do in order to manifest this working. And similarly, you know, if it was a doctor, if it was whatever kind of profession that you were thinking of, you know. And if you don't know, that's a good point. Thank you for leading me down this path. If you're not sure, you can also use pendulum or dowsing rods or whatever. I think everybody should have a good yes-no kind of divination system that they can use wherever, whenever, for themselves. That's effective. And you can use that to say that, okay, I'm going to ask this ancestor these questions, and what's going to be helpful to me in this moment, and what's going to not be helpful to me in this moment, and how you can move forward from there. So that's another way that's, you know, you can define those actual specific things for you. Because again, I could give you a list of like 200 kinds of herbs for ancestors, but the more you do it, the more you realize, you know, yes, in certain circumstances, you can use just about anything for anything. You know, I was looking at one of my ancestor posts about, I had some crazy friend that used to divine in the toilet bowl in the morning. You know, I mean, you can use anything. I don't recommend it, but you know, you can use anything for anything. And, you know, whatever. Some's going to work for you and some it's not. You know, it's really cute. Yeah. So yes, that I think is helpful. There's lots of other things. So using that, if you're not sure, okay, did I have somebody who might have been a doctor? Did I have somebody who might have been a lawyer? I had a plumber, that was good, that's helpful sometimes. You know, oh yes, please help me with this plumbing problem. If you're not sure of the ancestors, if you're not sure of the names, I mean, usually what I do is some kind of automatic writing, which I was talking to a millennial witch the other day, they're like, what's that? I'm like, all right. So, you know, just get a piece of paper and light a candle and start your hand moving across the page in whatever shapes, ways it wants to move, and then look at it afterwards, see if there's any names or letters or things that show up, and you know, so that way you can find these extra ancestors that you might not know. I mean, I did a class once and the professor asked all of us there, who knows all names of your 4 grandparents, you know what I mean? Some people only know that far, some people, luckily witches usually know back a little bit farther, but still when we think about it, there's still, you know, a whole giant chain of people that you don't necessarily know all the names and everything like that. Yes, we could go through Ancestry.com. I don't like Mormons, I'm gonna say that, and I don't like the fact that they're baptizing all of our dead after we go, so that's my point about Ancestry.com. But some people have gone through there, and if you don't care about Mormons trying to co-opt your dead after you're dead, by all means, definitely check that out. But usually what I would rather do is just go through it myself and see what names present themselves. I mean, a dear friend of mine is adopted, and all he knows is a lot of his people were from Germany. So, we go through the list of, okay, top 10 German names, with the pendulum or the dowsing rods or whatever, and see which ones hit a yes for him, and this way he knows who he can call and things like that. I mean, I make my god kids do it. I had to do it in my house, just to do a litany of all your ancestors that you remember, when you're leaving offerings, all the names. They do that a lot in Lukumi. Before you do a reading, you call on the names of all your ancestors that you can remember. And, if you remember it, then it can live on. So, we say these things and we reiterate these things over and over again, and then we can strengthen that connection. So I usually don't start out asking for things in the beginning. I'll ask for guidance or, help with a situation or something, For my godmother who passed, her thing was for my most highest good. I think that's a good thing to put in when you're leaving offerings or something like that, because you don't necessarily know what your most highest good is. You don't know what it is that's best for you, especially if you're starting out with working for them. Maybe you think you need to have this house or this job or this relationship, but maybe that would be something that would be really dangerous to you, so that if you just frame things in, what's best for me, that allows the universe to come and present you with what's best for you. And it allows you to have a different understanding of the answers that are given when you're dealing with these kinds of situations. Oh, I didn't get that car. Well, maybe I had a friend whose mother drove a brand new Mercedes, the steering wheel came off in her hand. We think we all maybe want a Mercedes, but then if we're going to be driving on the freeway and it's going to come off in her hand, no, maybe we don't want that car. Maybe we want the, cheaper car, the crappier car, the car that was a friend of mine, my best friend got a free car. Maybe we want a free car, So just allowing that stuff to come in, I think, is really helpful as well. So just opening your mind up when you're trying to come up with extra people, and yes, you can definitely shut the door to the people that you don't want to invite, the same way that you would if it was a regular kind of party and you didn't want to invite them. And I think that if your protections are strong, it shouldn't be an issue. And how can I tell? Okay, well, I can tell if I use a lot of Palo Santo. If you burn Palo Santo, I know you guys burn Palo. Anybody else burn Palo Santo? Palo Santo, the joy about Palo Santo is if it hits a big pocket of negativity, it'll burn black. Normally it'll burn white. So that to me I think is really helpful, especially if you're not used to having clues. So it's a rainforest stick. I want to say like Rusa gravolens or something like that is the Latin name. But you can get sustainably harvested Palo Santo. There was a big controversy, like everything on the internet. Oh no, Palo Santo, rainforest, But like everything on the internet, the reality of it is different. So you can get, sustainable Palo Santo. I like to use that. I do use sage. I don't use it very often because if somebody's nursing or pregnant, it can cause issues. So that's why I don't usually burn sage. But if you like sage, go ahead and sage it up. White candles, I almost always have white candles going because then you can use that as an indicator of exactly what's happening in your situation to see, okay, is there an issue if I have a white candle on the ancestors thing and the darn thing turns black? Or even, I had one crazy woman, she would talk about magical food. She was putting all kinds of things in the food. She worked in the airport in New Orleans, and she was in love with this guy who also worked in the airport. So she would leave these magical stuff in the break room for him to eat and all the rest of the people to eat. She was out there. And I was doing a working for her.
Did you find love?
She bought a wedding dress, and he hadn't even spoken to her in 4 years. So there you go. Alrighty then. There was something I was helping her with, and in all my years of doing it, the darn thing exploded into a bazillion pieces, and you know, that I ended up getting burnt trying to stop it from setting off my electronics on fire, and like, yeah, so you can have all range of things happen. I did do a post on the blog about what top 10 magic candle burning conundrums. So like, you know, if it burns to the left, if it burns to the right, if it burns, you know, if there's a crack, like there's all these things you can tell from having your white candles going on, which will also help you with whether or not there's negativity that's entering into your situation. And then again, other things that just funky in general, you know what I mean? When I've had a lot of funky things around, there's almost always bad smells, there's almost always, you know, people are breaking stuff, there's weird noises, all of those kinds of things start manifesting when there's kinds of negativity. And then just do the cleansing. And when I do, maybe this is because I'm an air sign, but when I attack a cleansing, I do it, you know, as regimented as possible, A, B, C, and D. You know, just go down the list, hit it every single which way. It's like roaches, that's what I like to liken it to, you know, which is funny because we're talking about the gay day, but when you attack it, you have to attack it on all fronts. You know what I mean? If you just put down the same kind of poison, they get immune to it, and it's the same kind of thing. So if you always cleanse with, one of my godsons was like, oh, I always use Florida water. I was like, that means you've been using Florida water for 5 years. Like, there's a bazillion other things you can use to cleanse things. So why don't you just go down the list and try those other things, because, you know, whatever's in your space has become immune to that. So that kind of thing. All right, anything else? I know, it's an insane amount of stuff. You have any questions? I was like, okay. It's a lot, a little bit a lot, as my grandmother used to say. A little bit a lot, a little bit a lot. But yeah, you're just establishing a relationship with them. That's the best way I can say to give it. I gave you 2 veves down here at the bottom of the sheet that I gave you. These are from, I don't even know if you can get this anymore. Lewis with Black Moon Publishing had done, he had done a book of different kinds of spider gate workings and things like that. So that veve down at the bottom is a spider gated one, and then there's one for the barrel. The barrel ones usually look like a coffin most of the time. There are the Mama Brigitte ones, usually have some kind of cairn or cross or something on it. The other ones have a heart on it, which I think speaks to her connection to Urzuli and things like that. What's a veve? A ritual ground drawing and cornmeal. Some say, since it's an oral tradition, that they were originally the patterns left in the dirt after a ceremony. So people noticed that there was a commonality of different symbols, and then they started going, hey, well, if every time we do this thing for this Loa, this shows up, what happens if we write it down with cornmeal or flour or coffee ahead of time? That'll serve as kind of a calling card for the spirits and things like that. Usually they're danced on. Some people, Sally Ann Glassman was originally a tattoo artist, so some people do have veves as tattoos. I have, I want to say 6, I think, at this point. Some people don't think it's a good idea. I have a friend that is the psychic for Michael Jackson's daughter. She has a veve tattoo. She said it was not a good idea after she got it. She has an Urzuli, by the way, in case anybody was wondering. But I don't necessarily advocate doing them as a tattoo. If you are going to do it as a tattoo, I would do it in henna first, or woad, or something like that, so you have it on your body temporarily first. If you do want to just get a connection with it, if you want to have some sort of sleep journey dream work with your ancestors, you can put one of the veves on a piece of parchment paper and stick that under your bed or under your pillow or something like that, and then when you wake up, have a pen and paper right there to record what your dreams are, because sometimes carrying them back into this realm is very difficult, so you've got to get it right there, right when you wake up, right when you're remembering, and then you can move forward, so that's helpful. I would do a specific veve. The best veve book out there, you can get it unscribed, is Milo Rigaud's veve book. He's got a lot of them in there for the barons and Mama Brigitte and some gated ones and stuff like that, so that's nice that it's free. He went around in the 30s with all of his students in Haiti, and he just recorded every veve possible that he could find, so it's a valuable resource. Some of the ones Charles Gandolfo from the Voodoo Museum in New Orleans did do a book of Veves. His Mama Brigitte is kind of scary looking, looks like a vagina dentata. I'm not fond of that one. We don't usually use that well. I mean, I guess there would be a reason that we had to have a vagina dentata day in my house. But you never know. You never know. Anything is possible. All right, so I've been talking for a very long time. What doesn't go on the ancestor altar? I will say this, for all the sex, death, all the rest of it that's out there, a lot of times this particular arena is a little fuzzy. What's his name? Donald Constantino, who did the Sacred Arts of Haitian Voodoo show. He's out of UCLA in California. They have a very large Haitian Voodoo art collection. Not the largest in the world, the largest. Well, my friend who works at Ramapo College in Jersey says they have an even larger collection there at Ramapo. They just had a show this year. But when they had the Sacred Arts of Haitian Voodoo show that toured, he had Gaida canes that were covered with condoms. They were shaped like penises and they were covered with condoms. But normally, we keep sex separate from the altars. So I would just do a yes/no. If you have your altar there and you're thinking about getting busy in front of it, I would just do a yes/no and check before to see if that's a good thing. I knew somebody who had sex in front of an altar once. He was a Santero, he should have known better. And he was having sex with his wife because he wanted to have another kid. And their other kid at the time stuck his finger in a socket and like electrocuted himself. The kid was fine, but then the kid ran around in circles for like 3 hours afterwards, bouncing off the walls. So I think that asking first in that situation is better rather than just doing it and having some sort of psychic repercussions from what's happening in that situation. So, all right, that's all I'm going to say today, I guess.
Lilith, can you plug your sites where people can find you?
Oh, sure. My blog is called Voodoo Universe, and it's on Patheos. My website is lilithdorsey.com, and people can find me there. People can find me, I'm all over the place. People can find me on social media. I'm Lilith Dorsey on all social media. And yeah, there's lots of things coming up. There's lots of talks and books and things in the works. So it's been a busy year, and it's going to continue to be a busy year for me. So thank you very much.